Welcome to our webinar on the expansion of the EU and how the EU, the European Union, is treating immigration from its newest members, that is to say Croatia, which is joining next week, and Bulgaria and Romania, who, until the accession of Croatia, were the newest members of the European Union. I am Sophie King. I am Managing Director of a company called Peregrine Immigration Management Limited, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. And we have some very excellent and expert speakers from all over Europe. So Bert van der Maas is joining us from IBS in the Czech Republic. Bert's got his webcam on, so you can all see him. I'm turned around to turn mine on. Also, when I turn mine on, it slows down my connection, is my excuse. And then we have Fiona from France. So Fiona's company is called Expat Partners, and she's dialing in from France. She's also put her webcam on, which is making me feel a bit guilty. We should have had Tom Ryan from Accedes from Ireland. He couldn't make it today. He's got meetings at the department, so I'm going to be doing the Irish slides, and I would like to apologise in advance for the fact that I couldn't bring you guys Tom as I said I was going to, but I'll do my best to fill his shoes. We have Francesco from Mazesci in Italy, who's going to talk to us about Croatia and Italy and what's going on there. Laura is here from Sagadoy in Spain, in Madrid. And then last but definitely not least, we have Chisholm from Dearson Wynyard in the UK to talk about the UK. Obviously, we couldn't talk about every country in the EU on this webinar, or we would have been lecturing you in quite a boring way all afternoon. So if there are any countries that anybody's interested in which we aren't covering, we do have information on them, and we're very happy to share it. So we can send that afterwards, or, you know, as I said, put your hand up or type a question into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer your questions as and when we can. I think we had a question on the registration form about what countries people were particularly interested in, and I think we've covered them. Although one person did ask about Finland, and we're not covering Finland. So if that person's managed to dial in, let me know, and we'll talk about Finland briefly as well. Right. So first things first. The EU. I thought it would be a good idea to set some kind of set the ground before we start talking about the expansion of the EU, and talk a tiny little bit about the history of the EU. This is a bit like being at school again, and I did actually steal this map from an educational school website. So that's why, if you're being reminded of being at school, that's the reason why. So the EU was founded in 1957, which was 56 years ago, and it's currently got 27 countries. So when it started out 56 years ago in 1957, its founder members were, of course, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And then it stayed pretty much those guys, well, definitely completely those guys, until the 70s. So in 1973, the UK joined, along with Ireland and Denmark, which might be surprising to some people because the UK is a fairly reluctant member of the EU, but actually it was one of the first to get involved after those founder members. Then in the 80s, it was expanded in the southern part of Europe. So Greece joined in 81, and then Spain and Portugal both joined in 1986. Finland, Sweden, Austria, none of those guys joined until 1995, which maybe this is showing my age, but that seems pretty recently to me. And then obviously in the last few years we've had really quite extensive expansion of the EU into Eastern Europe. So there were 10 new members in 2004. Those are the guys shown on the map here in that nice pale blue colour. So Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, all of those guys over there. And then Bulgaria and Romania joined in 2007. They're down there in pink on the bottom right-hand side. And then we've got Croatia is the next one. Croatia is shown here in this map in this kind of pale greeny blue colour. So this map is from a while ago, I think, and it's got the official candidate countries shown in this kind of bluey green dark colour. And Croatia is the most recent candidate country to stop being a candidate and start being a member from next week, 1st of July. So that's a little very miniature history of the EU and how it's grown in the last 50, 60 years. So 27 countries right now, today, but next week it will be 28. Croatia's joining. The next thing that's important to talk about is the restrictions on transitional on new member countries. So Bulgaria and Romania, before Croatia joined, Bulgaria and Romania were the most recent EU members. And as I'm sure most people on this webinar are aware, there have been restrictions on their freedom and ability to work in the rest of the EU. And those restrictions are due to end at the end of this year, 31st of December 2013. So from New Year's Day 2014, from the 1st of January, it will not be legal for any EU member state to place restrictions on the ability of Bulgarians and Romanians, or on the permission for Bulgarians and Romanians to work in their countries. That's not going to be possible anymore. Whatever anybody wants, whatever anybody says, whatever the newspapers like to talk about, that's the law, that's the way it's going to be, unless you want to leave the EU, basically. And another minor point that I thought was important to mention is that there are some countries, if we go back to our map, you can see out there Norway, there are a few countries which are greyed out on that map of Europe. So Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland are not members of the EU, but to all intents and purposes when you're talking about immigration, it's often as if they were, because they have bilateral agreements on freedom of movement, so the right to enter and exit and move around within Europe, and also on work permission. Switzerland is a bit of a tricky one, because Switzerland does have bilateral agreements. It has different arrangements for EU nationals, but they're not that free, put it that way. And Switzerland's hit the headlines, well, the headlines in my small world of immigration. Switzerland's been in the news recently for imposing new quotas and new restrictions on EU, on all EU nationals. So not just the new ones who joined in 2004, or Bulgaria and Romania, or even Croatia, but also on the founder members of the EU. Switzerland's putting more restrictions and more, it's got quotas in place for locally hired EU nationals, that type of thing. So that's quite interesting, but really it's for another day, because Switzerland's not actually part of the EU, so we're not talking about Switzerland today. I just thought I'd mention it as an aside. So a few more kind of basic things to be aware of before we start talking about specific countries. The first thing is that under the accession treaty of 2005, well, under EU law, freedom of movement for EU nationals into other EU countries can't be restricted. So freedom of movement means being able to enter a country, move around in that country, go out of that country. So basically, in essence, what that means is you can't make people from other EU countries have to get visas to come to your country anymore. You're not allowed. However, for work permission, transitional measures are permitted under the accession treaty, and those can be put in place by EU member states for a maximum of 7 years. So that means that when a new EU member country joins the EU, so for example, let's talk about Bulgaria and Romania. When they joined back in 2007, the rest of the EU member states who were already in the EU were allowed to place restrictions on the permission to work of Bulgarians and Romanians up to a maximum period of 7 years. So it was, and that 7 years is kind of issued in increments of first 2 years, and then 3 years, and then another 2 years. So basically, what it means is that when that new EU country joins, you can say, as an existing EU member state, okay, we're going to put restrictions on their ability to work. We're not going to give them free access to the labour market, and that's going to go for 2 years. And then when that 2-year period is over, actually before it finishes, you can extend it for another 3 years, up to a maximum of 5 years. And after that 5 years, if you can demonstrate that you really, really have a very delicate labour market and there aren't enough jobs for your own people, and you really think that disruption to your labour market is going to be absolutely, terrible, then you can extend it for another 2 years. So that would make a maximum of 7 years altogether. And that's what's happened in some places for the Bulgarians and Romanians, and will also be applicable for Croatians, as we'll see. The third and fourth point are that even despite these transitional measures, it is not possible for EU member states to restrict the ability or the permission to work for new member states. So I've put Croatians here, but it was the same for Romanians and Bulgarians, and it was the same for for the countries who joined in 2004. If they're legally working in a member state and have been for a period of at least 12 months plus on a legal status, so a work permit or a residence permit that permits work, if they're legally working for 12 months or longer, then on the date of accession, so for Croatia that will be next week, they're allowed to work freely. So that means they had a work permit, don't need one anymore from the 1st of July if they've been working there for 12 months or longer. If they've been working there for 12 months or less, then that's not the case. But when they reach that 12-month period, then they'll be given that permission. And finally, self-employed workers also aren't subject to restrictions or transitional measures. But if a self-employed worker comes into an EU member state as a self-employed worker, takes up work as a self-employed person and goes ahead and is self-employed, and then they change from that status into an employed person, then in that scenario they would need to gain work permission. But the important thing to know is that self-employed workers are not subject to restrictions. So there are a couple of exemptions there. Little summary on Romania and Bulgaria. So those guys joined in January 2007. So as we've said, the 7 years of their transitional measures end on New Year's Eve, 31st of December 2013. In practice, I'd say most of the EU member states have allowed free access to the labour market already for Romanians and Bulgarians. Some of them imposed restrictions for the first couple of years and then removed them. Some of them imposed restrictions for 5 years and then removed them. Some of them changed their mind a bit. We'll talk about that later on. These ones that I've listed here on this slide, these are the guys who are still putting transitional measures or who still have transitional measures in place right now. So Austria, Germany, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands and the UK have transitional measures for Romanians and Bulgarians in place at the moment. In practice, mostly what that means is that they are restricting permission to work for Bulgarians and Romanians into only allowing them permission to work in certain sectors, maybe shortage skills sectors, that type of thing. But from the end of this year, 6 months from now, they're not going to be able to do that anymore, and they're going to, have to let those guys work freely. This is something which has been massive in the press in the UK, and I think probably in Austria, Germany, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Malta, and the Netherlands also. There's been a lot of political spin in the UK about how hundreds of thousands of Romanians and Bulgarians will immediately swarm across the border, or, we don't really have borders, I suppose, swim up out of the channel on the 1st of January and, overrun our country. There was a funny story in the papers about how the British government was planning to place adverts in Romania saying how horrible our country was in order to dissuade people from coming here. So there was a serious plan, apparently, to go around putting adverts up in Romania talking about how British food is horrible and all our people are really unfriendly. The weather's really terrible because the British people are so terrified and worried. But the fact is that there is a lack of data. It's difficult to estimate what the impact will be. There hasn't been good data kept on what happened with the members who joined in 2004. And the reality is, I think that it's really not going to be. I don't think we'll suddenly be overrun with Bulgarians and Romanians, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. So all of that said, now let's talk about some countries in a bit more specific detail. Has anybody got any questions or comments or things they'd like to bring up so far? You're all muted, but I think you can unmute yourselves. If not, put your hand up or send a message in the chat. Cool. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Oh, hang on. I think I do have a question here. Yes. Alexander, let me unmute you. Hi. What's your question?
Hi. Oh, yeah. Am I online now?
Yes, you are. You are.
Oh, yeah. No, I noticed it. It's my first webinar. Hi to everybody. First of all, I just have a simple question, I guess. It is, where can I find these interim regulations on the immigration for Bosnian and Croats?
For
Is
Bulgaria,
it
yeah, I can send you the directive of the and the treaty if you like after the webinar. If that would be
that's
helpful.
where it is. I see.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering how to find it out for Germany, which where I work in, and yeah,
Yeah.
that was it generally. Oh yeah.
Okay. No problem.
Thank you.
No problem. I'll be happy to send you some material afterwards. Definitely. All right. I'm going to leave
Okay,
you again
thank you.
now. Thanks. Right then. Okay, so I think the first country that we're going to talk about is the Czech Republic. So we have Bert from IBS. Bert, please go ahead and please introduce yourself briefly as well.
Well, thank you, Sophie, and thank you for organizing this webinar. I know how much work it takes to get everything put together. By the way, if it's difficult to understand me, please let me know, because then I might switch off the webcam, and that might.
No, it's good. It's good. Your sound's good actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Bert van der Maas. I work in the Czech Republic. We have offices in Prague and in Brno, and we've been providing relocation services, including immigration support, for a little bit over 15 years now. So we've actually seen the accession of the Czech Republic into the EU, which was also a very interesting time. Now, if I look for Croatians, then the situation in Czech Republic is quite simple. On May 15, the Czech government adopted a resolution granting actually Croatians the same rights as other EU nationals. That means that as of next week in Czech Republic, a Croatian, in order to legally work and stay in the Czech Republic, only needs to register with the Labor Office and register with the foreign police. Croatians who are already in the Czech Republic and who do have a residence permit, they can choose to keep it or they can choose to exchange it. Applications in process will be cancelled, and of course new applications are no longer necessary. And that actually makes the situation for Croatians as of next week the same as it has been for Bulgarians and Romanians starting January 2007. Also there were no restrictive measures implemented in the Czech Republic. And it's interesting to see, I see that the graph doesn't show completely, at least on my screen. Yeah, there's some more. Yeah, now it's I can see the other years also. And these are actually, this is data, the graph shows data provided by the Czech Labor Office on Labor Office registrations and work permits issued for Croatians, Romanians and Bulgarians. And there you see that with the accession of Romania and Bulgaria to the EU in 2007, there was the number of Romanians and Bulgarians working working legally in the Czech Republic almost tripled. And after that, it varied a bit. For 2012, we don't have data from the Labor Office because January 2012 they implemented a new computer system which is not able to provide any statistical data so far, but we know that the trend is continuing up. Now, the expectation is that for Croatians the same will happen, so also the numbers will go up, but the total number of Croatians in the Czech Republic is relatively small, and it is also not expected that there will be dramatic increase. Also, what we do not expect is that there will be restrictive measures, although when adopting the resolution in May, one of the points is that that resolution can be changed depending on the situation in the labor market, but it is not expected that on short term there will be restrictions implemented. Having said that, Czech Republic is working on a complete overhaul revision of the immigration laws, and implementation of that was expected early 2014. We have some political complications at the moment, and we think that this will be delayed, and it will probably be either late 2014 or early 2015. And that new legislation, it's clear, draft is already available, and it's clear that there are more instruments for government to influence the influx of foreigners, and tools that are, for instance, now or very clearly in that new legislation is proof of education is becoming very important, where proof of equivalence of diplomas, for instance, is required. That has been implemented some time ago, but there were some exceptions. In the new legislation, that is now more strict. The same is for a marriage, where up to now Czech Republic has been quite flexible in accepting marriage, but even a relationship, so without a marriage certificate. In the new legislation, that's quite strict, and the marriage certificate is not sufficient anymore. It really needs to be a proof of a common household, and that's also where the Czechs will focus on. And the new legislation will offer a quota system. Expectation is not that it will be used from the start, but at least that option is then available. So summarizing, for the Czech Republic, for Croatians, the same as for Romanians and Bulgarians, there will be no restrictive measures, and we don't expect them short term, but the longer term trend is clearly that it will, for non-EU nationals, it will be more difficult to be able to enter the Czech Republic.
Okay, thanks, Bert. That was really interesting. And just for anyone who's listening, I think Czech Republic is a good example. For anyone who's listening who's interested in the other EU members who joined in 2004, I just wanted to mention that Czech Republic is pretty representative, actually. The other kind of Eastern European EU members are also not putting restrictions on Croatians as they join the labour market, with the exception of Slovenia, which has got transitional measures because it's right next door, basically. But yeah, Hungary, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these guys, none of them are going to be putting transitional measures, so Croatians will be able to work freely in all of those, which is an interesting example of reciprocity, I think. Anyway, thank you, Bert. That was really interesting. Okay, so moving on now. Next we have Fiona from France. Fiona, would you like to introduce yourself quickly and then tell us all about France and what France is going to be doing?
Yes, thank you, Sophie. I'm Fiona Mougenot. I run Expat Partners. We're an immigration firm based in Paris. We have 10 years experience, and I myself have over 15 years experience in the immigration field. Now, regarding Croatia and Croatians coming to work in France, at the moment, no formal decision has been made by the French government as to whether there will be a transition period or not, and the restrictions. We do think that probably they will be put under the same or similar restrictions to the Bulgarians and the Romanians. As Sophie has already informed everybody, and you all probably know, that period will be ending on the 1st of January in 2014. At the moment, they are under the restrictions that do require a work permit for periods of over 90 days, and a work permit always, and for periods of over 90 days they do require a residence permit as well. Now, for any companies who would be hiring Bulgarians and Romanians, and let's say this is probably going to be the same for the Croatians, there is a labour market test that is required, except for a very long list of 291 occupations. It's a large scope of activity, which basically goes from agriculture to construction, engineers to accountants. So in most cases, or in a large number of cases, a company could probably adapt the actual job title and the role to an occupation that is on the list, so that they do not have to conduct the market test. The labour market test. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. A couple of people have said on the chat that they can't hear you that well. Can you try and speak a bit? I can actually hear you fine, but I think if you, yeah, thanks.
Right. Sorry, is that better?
That's better. That is better, yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So, labour market tests in France are conducted for a period of 8 weeks prior to actually filing a work permit, which of course adds on a lot of time on processing of a work permit application. Now, there also could be the secondment from an EU-based company where no work permit is required. A residence permit is required, though, if they're staying for over 90 days. They could also be sending the Bulgarian and the Romanian and the Croatian nationals as service providers to France. Again, no work permit is required under that status. A residence permit is always required for the period of over 90 days. The service providers must have a contract that is signed between the client based in France and the company that employs them in the EU. Also, if they were coming to provide any work that is for the benefit of the employer, as such, in the home country, again, no work permit application is required, and again, the residence permit if the period is over 90 days. For all secondments of all EU nationals, regardless of whether they're Bulgarian, Romanian, or Croatian nationals, in France, a prior declaration must be filed with the labour inspection. This is a very important point which a large number of companies forget, and there are a lot of audits that are being conducted at the moment. Marriage to EU nationals does give a right to work, providing that the EU national is employed in France. Therefore, for the Croatian national, if he's married, for example, to an American and he has a job in France, yes, his American spouse will be allowed to work in France as well. Self-employed, there are no restrictions. As Sophie has mentioned, there is a very little data about Croatian nationals in France, and certainly there's nothing that we've been able to manage to get from the labour offices. The only report that has given us some information is dated 2011, which actually just gives 40,000 Croatian nationals who are living in France. There's no indication of whether they are first arrivals or second generation. 5,000 of them are living in the Paris area. In the second half of the 20th century, Croatian nationals who expatriated to various destinations across the world, there was a total of 750,000. And in France, just to give you an idea of seconded employees in 2011, 19% of those were from Poland, actually, and the only country that lowered their number of seconded employees for that year was Croatia. So I don't think that there's any reason to think that there would be a huge increase of Croatian nationals arriving in France, and that should certainly not affect non-EU nationals or the modification of the present situation that they have to undergo to get a work authorization. Again, we do feel that there will be a transition period and a special list of occupations as well. Are there any questions? Sophie, I'll let you take over for Ireland.
Oh, sorry, I think I forgot to unmute myself. So, yes, I'm talking about Ireland. I'm taking over from Tom, who was supposed to be talking about Ireland today. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it, so you've got me instead, and I will do my best to try and cover that well. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I think I forgot to unmute myself, so I've got a few questions. We can't hear you, but I think that's from a minute ago. So in Ireland, Croatia sought EU membership in the first place when Ireland was had the EU presidency, and is now joining at the end of Ireland's current presidency, which is quite an interesting little fact. And Ireland is fairly unique, actually, among Western European countries for not imposing any transitional on Croatian workers coming into work in Ireland. So that means that from next week, Croatian nationals will have unrestricted access to the Irish labour market. And that decision has been made based on the following facts. Firstly, there's a relatively small working population in Croatia. It's a small country, so Ireland's not too bothered. According to the Irish government analysis, there is a low propensity for Croatians to migrate. I think that probably tallies with the figures that Fiona's just given. There aren't millions and millions of Croatians rushing around the world. And there is a very, very, very small population of Croatian people in Ireland at the moment. So there were just 12 work permits issued for Croatians in the whole of 2012. So basically, Ireland is not worried about a big influx. The administration of imposing transitional measures would not be worth the benefit. It wouldn't really do Ireland any good, basically. So they've decided to give free access to their labour market from next week to Croatian nationals. As far as Romania and Bulgaria go, they've had free access to Ireland's labour market since July 2012. And when that was introduced in July 2012, it was applied retrospectively to January 2012. What that meant in practice was that any applications that were pending at that time were immediately, they didn't need to be approved anymore. Romania and Bulgaria were given access, just like all other EU nationals, to the labour market. And I think Ireland's a good example because it gave free access to Romania and Bulgaria in 2012, and it also did the same with the 2004 new EU members when they joined. And what we've seen in Ireland is that far from what one might have expected would be that opening up the labour market to people from all of these extra countries would restrict routes for non-EU nationals. That's what I would expect, and that's what we've seen already in what Bert's been talking about, and Fiona as well. But in Ireland, actually, the tendency has been the other way. The tendency has been to open up the market even more to non-EU nationals. So the labour market test for work permits in Ireland, which is applicable to people applying for a specific type of employment permit called a work permit, has just been shortened down from 8 weeks down to 4, so that's a huge difference. And very recently, Ireland's made it a lot clearer and a lot more straightforward for people to apply for work permission for service providers, which is another slightly simplified route to bring non-EU nationals into the Irish labour market. So I think it's quite interesting that Ireland not only is not applying transitional measures, but also is opening up its market in general to non-EU nationals. I don't know why I think that's so interesting, but I think that's pretty interesting. And yeah, in a nutshell, no restrictions for Croatian nationals in Ireland, and nor are there any for Romanians and Bulgarians. If anybody's got any questions about Ireland, please do ask me, and I'll do my best to answer them. But if I can't, I'll pass them on later on to those who know more than I do. Right. Okay. Hopefully that's it for Ireland. So Italy, Francesco, please tell us about Italy.
Hello, everyone. So in Italy, it looks like the Croatian national will be treated as all the other EU nationals since July 1st. And there will be no restrictions on them, and they shall immediately treated like all the other EU nationals and free access.
Oh, Francesco, your sound's not great. Can you try and get a bit closer to the mic, maybe? Or
yeah, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's much better. That's much better. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I was saying that Croatian national will not have any restrictions.
You've gone again. You've gone again. It's like you start talking and then walk backwards. Or
oh my God, I don't know what's happening. I'm not changing anything.
Yeah, you carry on talking and I'll tell you if anything. Yeah.
Let me try to fix it.
But that sounds good now. That sounds good.
Guess it's better now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so no restrictions on corrections. That the only immigration for money that would need to be completed by the Croatian national is the registration.
Oh my goodness, it's gone again, Francesca. I'm so sorry. It's like every time you say the word Croatia, your sound goes off.
I'm so sorry about this.
It sounds okay now. It sounds okay now. Like when we're just talking about the sound, it's fine. I think we're gonna have to try again. Try again, and if it doesn't work, then we'll skip Italy, and you can maybe dial in on a phone instead, and then we can come back to you in a minute.
Okay.
We can do that. But try again now, because it sounds okay now when you're talking now.
Okay, so the only immigration formality that will need to be completed by Croatian national would be the registration with the town of the city where they live in order to become resident in Italy. So they won't have to go through any permit or visa process. They will not be subject to any qualifications. However, it is still too early to predict.
No, I'm sorry, it's gone. It's gone again. You know what, Francesco? If you can dial in on a landline phone instead, let's try that. And for now, I'll jump forward to Spain. I think we have next, and then I'll come back to Italy in a minute, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. Sorry.
Sure.
Right. Okay, Laura, that means you're up next. So this is Laura from Sagadoy in Madrid, and Laura, please introduce yourself first, and then tell us all about Spain.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Fernandez. I'm a senior lawyer at Sagadoy Abogados in Spain, and I work in the immigration department. Basically, in Spain, as you know, the situation of the unemployment is very high. We have currently around 25% of unemployment rate. So obviously the government takes this into account to any immigration policy or matter that may have impact on the labor market. So in 2007, when Bulgaria and Romania joined the European Union, firstly the government opened the labor market, okay? But after 2 years, they realized that it needed to be changed. So the Bulgarians actually from 2009 have free access to the labor market, but the Romanians need work permit from 22nd July 2011. Okay. If the Romanians are intra-company transfers or self-employed workers, they wouldn't need a work permit at all, just following, obviously, the European Union instructions on this regard. And for the local hire work permits for Romanians, in any case, the work visa or the labor market test will be applied. For the Croatians, the government just announced last Friday the measures, and there will be restrictions. There will be the 2 years transition period until 2015, and therefore they will be in the same situation that that have currently the Romanian employees. So for local hire, it will be necessary a work permit with no visa and no labor market test, and intra-company transfers or self-employed won't need a work permit. So that could be the situation for them now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laura. So Spain was the country I referred to at the very beginning, which changed its mind a little bit about Romania. And what was the reason for that, Laura? Was it so they allowed free access to the Romanians, and then they suddenly went back on it, basically?
Yeah, it was basically for the crisis, you know, in the at the beginning. Yeah. We have a very high population of Bulgarian and Romanians, although there is no really official data on that. But I think it was also a matter of public opinion. So when the crisis was in the most difficult times, they had to apply this It seems that definitely Romania won't have, it won't finish until next year, and Croatia will see after 2 years.
Yeah, yeah, and I would imagine that Croatia, I'm sure they'll extend the transition as well, won't they?
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens, but okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Francesca, do you want to try your sound now? How's it? Francesca? Oh, not sure if he's with us yet or not. Well, let's move on to the UK in that case. Chisholm, would you like to introduce yourself and your company and tell us a little bit about how the UK's reacting to the introduction of Croatia into the EU? I've muted, by the way, Chisholm, so you want to unmute yourself. Chisholm, are you here? have you unmuted yourself?
Sophie, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, Francesco, you're back. Brilliant. Well, let's go back to Spain.
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I was saying that it looks like Croatian nationals. Let me just. I still have a problem here. Sorry.
We have some echo.
Okay.
Don't we? I think if you turn your speakers down and your mic up.
Yeah, I've done it. Okay, so it looks like the Croatian national will be treated as all the other EU nationals since their entrance into the European Union, and they will have free access to the labor market immediately. This means that the only immigration formality that they will need to carry out is the registration of the residency address with the town hall, and they won't have to go through any work permit or work visa process. However, it is still too early to predict that no restrictions will be enforced against Croatian nationals, since the government is still evaluating whether or not to apply the same limits that were used against Bulgarian and Romanian. And they may come out with a last-minute regulation to restrict their access to the labor market. So we'll have to wait a little bit more to understand what will be Italian position against Croatian nationals. In case the same restrictions will be applied, only highly specialized employees will be treated as normal EU nationals. Otherwise, they will need to go through the work permit and work visa process. And for local hiring, that there are also the quotas restrictions. So it will be pretty hard for them to get access to the labor market here. And talking about the restrictions against Romanian and Bulgarian, they lasted for 5 years. And starting from January 1st, 2012, that they have finally had free access to the labor market. In the past, they needed to be highly specialized employees to work here freely. Otherwise, they needed to get a work visa or a work permit. Do you have any questions?
Excellent. Thanks, Francesco. That was perfect sound. I don't know what you did. It was really good. Thank you very much.
I don't know what was happening before.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. No, that's right. And have you noticed, since Romania and Bulgaria were given free access in 2012, has there been any kind of noticeable impact on anything else? You know, I mean, has it been harder to get approval for non-EU nationals, or have you noticed a big influx of? Do you know if there's been a lot of Romanians and Bulgarians registering since that time, or?
Well, it's surely been a good for them, because there are a lot of Romanian Bulgarian nationals here in Italy, and it was pretty hard. The fact that they had these restrictions caused a lot of illegal immigration in Italy, and black work here was a problem. But now, since they can work in Italy, they can be hired by Italian companies, they can come also on assignment with no restrictions. It's better. However, we don't see any chance for non-EU nationals regulation to change again here. The last implementation of the blue card, it was a big implementation of our immigration law, and I don't think that there will be any change. Immigration is a hard topic here, and we have a lot of restrictions. There are quotas for everything, quotas for local hiring, quotas for self-employment workers. Yeah. And this blue card is definitely the best option now for at least highly specialized non-EU nationals to come to work in Italy. But let's hope that there will be no restrictions for Croatian nationals. I don't think so, because there are not a lot of Croatian nationals so far in Italy.
Exactly.
So, it shouldn't be a problem for them. but I don't see that the regulation can change again.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Right. Okay. So moving on, our last country that we're looking at in a bit more detail today is the UK. It's always last because we're at the end of the alphabet, but not last in our hearts. So, would you like to talk about our glorious country?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Right, so my name's Chisholm Jide Ajagbe. I work for Dearson Wynyard. Dearson Wynyard is a company that provides immigration services to mainly corporate clients, and we've been doing so for just over 22 years. And we've had the pleasure of working with Sophie on this webinar. So thank you, Sophie, for having us. Right, so Croatia's joining after the 1st of July, and what does that mean in terms of the UK immigration? I'll just give you a bit of the basic for Croatia joining in regards to the transitional measures. That is going to be in place for the UK. The Croatians will be allowed to enter and reside. However, when it comes to employment, they will not be able to take up employment unless they have permission. And the sort of permission is really what I would like to discuss, because that's very new for an EU national. At the moment, the non-EU nationals are required to obtain what we call a certificate of sponsorship in order to work, and this is really targeted at highly skilled jobs, so jobs that require degree level. Croatians will need to get these certificates of sponsorships in order to work in the UK, and we would be looking at roles from a medium skilled to a high skilled job. So, for example, if a Croatian wanted to work in the UK, they would have to get the certificate, and they would not be allowed to engage in any sort of low-skilled work. And that's quite different to the Bulgarian and Romanians, because at the moment Bulgarian and Romanians do need permission to work. However, if they were going to engage in low-skilled work, such as an au pair, they do not need permission. And so there's a difference there. Croatians will not be allowed to engage in any low-skilled work. If you do want to work in the UK, you're going to need permission, and that permission will be by way of a certificate of sponsorship. Now, what's very interesting about this is, in order for an individual to be assigned a certificate of sponsorship, the company that you're going to work for has got to be a licensed sponsor. That means that you are registered with the Home Office to recruit foreign nationals. Now, at the moment, Bulgarian and Romanians do not need to work for a company that's a registered sponsor. So there's a slight difference there. It does seem the Croatians are going to have a bit more of a strict rule than the Bulgarian and Romanians. And the two key differences is the fact that Croatians won't be able to engage in low-skilled work, and will have to work for a company that has a registered license to sponsor foreign nationals. At the moment, it's really not possible to predict how much this is going to affect the immigration as a whole, because we don't know how many Croatians will be coming over to the UK. I guess those sorts of figures we would have shortly after, within a year or so after the 1st of July. So that's one we're going to keep an eye for. Now, in terms of how this affects the non-EU nationals, as I said earlier, any non-EU national who wants to work in the UK needs a certificate of sponsorship. Now, if the Croatians are going to be obtaining these certificates of sponsorship as well, that means both non-EU nationals and Croatians are going for the same certificates, which the Bulgarians and Romanians don't have to do. The good thing is, right now, the certificates of sponsorship are highly undersubscribed. So we can't say that the Croatians joining the EU is going to have a significant negative impact on non-EU nationals who are coming here to work. But that's going to be an interesting thing to see. However, at the moment, it's not predicted that it will affect them because it's highly undersubscribed at the moment. Another thing that I
Thank you. Oh, go on. Yeah.
Sorry. Another thing to mention with the just to highlight the slide already, but just wanted to highlight that the requirements for the certificate of sponsorship, which is really just the work permit. The certificate of sponsorship for non-EU nationals at the moment, they have to show that they have a degree, level 6, which is equivalent to an undergraduate degree. Croatians will only have to show a level 4 education, which is equivalent to A levels, what we call A levels here. So they will have a lower educational threshold to satisfy in order to obtain the certificate of sponsorship, and they will also be given preference. So if there is a situation where in the unlikely event that the certificates are oversubscribed, a Croatian national will be given priority over a non-EU national for the certificate, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, Croatians are going to be treated just as if they were non-EU nationals, with the exception that their skills don't have to be as high, and they don't have to get visas anymore, and they if there's only one certificate of sponsorship left in the world under the UK's quota system, and there's a Croatian guy and a non-Croatian, it will go to the Croatian, basically.
Definitely, definitely. And the negative thing in all of this is the fact that a Croatian will now have to seek employment with a company that has a sponsorship license to recruit, because without a sponsorship license, you cannot issue a certificate of sponsorship. Now, Bulgarian and Romanians do not have this restriction, and this is quite a big deal because whilst there are quite a few companies that do have the sponsorship license, there's also quite a lot who don't. So you can't just apply for any job.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That is a really big deal. Okay, yeah. All right. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. I have a few little summary conclusions here for everyone. Basically, in summary, this is what we've been talking about today. Countries, EU member countries, can limit access to the labour market for new members, i.e. Croatia, but only for up to 7 years. That would take us up to 2020 for Croatians, and the only way that they can get out of that is if they leave the EU altogether. So that's just, black and white. The next point that I really wanted us to think about today and that I find interesting is if the expansion of the EU and the kind of growth of the internal labour pool that we have within the EU means that there are less opportunities for non-EU workers. And I think the answer to that is that it depends, basically. So we've seen in some countries, then the answer is yes, we are seeing restrictions on labour market, labour market tests and restrictions on non-EU workers and quotas in place. And if anything, those are getting stricter and stronger in most places, although Ireland seems to be an exception and is opening up a little bit more to non-EU workers as well as to the EU. I think that's quite an interesting point. Basically, I'm sure it depends on each country's different economic situation, of course. Croatia, being a relatively little country, is probably going to have a low impact on the labour market as a whole. So really what we're talking about is, I think, more theoretical than anything else, and it's definitely a political situation as well. I don't think the UK, personally, I don't think that the introduction of Croatia into the EU would cause a great deal of disruption to the UK labour market, but I do know that in the UK at least, if that was in the newspaper, people would be upset about it. So there's a political kind of side of things to look at, as well as the actual economic reality whenever we're talking about the expansion of the EU and what the EU is planning to do, what each member state is planning to do with new members. Again, as I said at the beginning, we didn't have time to talk about every country in the EU today, but we do have details on every country. So please let us know if you'd like an overview report, if you'd like a copy of the accession treaty or the EU directives which are relevant, or of course if you want to talk to us or to any of our speakers today, I've got their contact details here. So please feel free. Obviously, Tom didn't actually talk, so you can email him if you want to, or you can email me and call me Tom. But please feel free to email, any one of us if you've got any questions about anything that we've talked about today. So that leaves us. I said we have 5 minutes. We've now got about 3 minutes because I've been going on. But has anybody got any? Has anybody got any questions they'd like to quickly ask now while we still have a couple of minutes? You have to put your hand up in the chat, I think, so that I can unmute you. No? Okay. Well, I'm going to take that as now everybody knows all about the EU and Croatia and Romania and Bulgaria. So it just leaves me to say thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise and your information, for preparing this and for preparing this with me. And thank you, everybody who came, for listening and for your attention and for your interest in this matter. It's always nice to know that there are people out there who are as interested in immigration as we are. And yeah, be in touch if you've got any questions. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. Goodbye.
Well, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.